So my name is Susan Marinek, and I'm the chair of the Historical Commission in Leverett. And this series that tonight's presentation and program is part of is called A Sense of Where You Are, Preserving Leverett's Historical Assets. And it came about because one of the things that the Historic Commission does is inventory all the historical assets in town. And so we got this idea about 3 or 4 years ago that while we were inventorying all these old mill sites and different places in Leverett, some of which are in quite hard to even imagine what they were once, as we were doing that, we might as well try to share them with people. And we did a survey in 2017-18 where people said they liked the survey because it helped them to know more about the historical parts of Leverett and the historical structures and landscapes in Leverett. And so that's what we've been doing ever since. So we welcome you to that tonight. Leverett's industrial heritage was really important. It's the way that the town was formed around sources of water and power for light little industries. And this one that we're going to focus on tonight is North Leverett Center area, Sawmill River. And you probably all are familiar with the sawmill that's in the center of North Leverett. We're going to be talking about a little bit downstream from that tonight. There was a lot of activity in the 18th and 19th century around creating things made out of metal. A family that was started by a blacksmith who came here after leaving central Massachusetts after the Revolutionary War was sort of the beginning of that. I just want to say that in the contemporary context, we are hoping that maybe some of this area that we're going to be looking at tonight might actually, as we study it more, be able to become preserved in some way, maybe as a park, maybe a heritage site, maybe a heritage trail along the river where you can see these amazing things that people did in the 18th and 19th century. And there have been important things happening there right through the 20th century as well. I mean, there were events in the 20th century in very close to the location we're going to be looking at tonight that were impacted families in the Sawmill River Valley and are still with us in a certain way. So I want to also just thank the Community Preservation Fund because they've been supporting us through the past 3 years in doing this work. So welcome and enjoy. Oh, and let me introduce the people who are going to actually be presenting the program tonight are Pleun Bouricius, who's a consultant to us, a historian and an expert. She lives in Plainfield, and Eva Gibavic, a native of Leverett, who knows more about Leverett than probably most of the rest of us put together. So.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. It's a beautiful evening, so I'm glad you're here. What we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to take a little bit of a tour. We're going to look at the mill site. We're going to talk about it. We're going to explore some of its history and what it looks like. And then on Sunday, there will be an opportunity at 2 p.m. to go and visit it, which is a little bit for the fleet of foot. That's one of those words I can't say in English, because it is backcountry walking. And so what I'm going to be doing is mostly showing you, presenting you a slideshow. You'll not be seeing a whole lot of me. However, one thing that I've noticed is that when I'm doing the slideshow, I can't see the chat very well. And so you should feel free to ask questions. And if I'm not responding to any kind of sign that you're giving, like by putting it in the chat or sticking up your hand, then just shout it out. And otherwise, Eva is always happy to repeat a question that someone is asking, or a remark that someone is making. Susan said I'm an expert. There's really only one thing I'm kind of expert at, and that's at being curious and the nosy Parker. So, okay, without too much further ado, as they say, I'm going to share my screen and start the slideshow. And that is never pretty. So this program has been going on, as Susan said, for a few years. We have done various mills. And the other thing I should tell you, but you probably already know that, is that we are recording tonight's program, and we will be putting it on the web. So this is I want to show you that this graphic that we have been using for the whole program is of a patent taken out by two people, one of whom was O.M. Pike, who we talked about, I think, 2 programs ago, and this one is the other person who took out the patent was Sanford S. Graves, kind of the main character of tonight. So he was a mover and a shaker in 1868, that's for sure. So tonight we're going to talk. I said it was a side shop when I did the PR, but it's kind of a misnomer, as you will find out. I wanted to say thank you to the Leverett Historical Commission, the Leverett CPC, the Leverett Conservation Commission, Pierre Benoit, and the Oberprillers, who are the owners of the land that we went on tonight. I, of course, want to draw attention to the fact that this land initially belonged to the Pocumtuck and other groups of Native American people in this area who undoubtedly used the Sawmill River. A big thank you to Eva Gibavic, whose vast stock of knowledge of Leverett history, experience with mapping and geography, and hours of research are foundational, as well as indispensable to this project. We produced together, a video, and I would say the good parts of it are hers, and the iffy amateurish parts of it are mine. This project is all about finding and interpreting mill sites, of which there are about 50 in Leverett. And I urge you to go and have a look at some of them. They pique your curiosity. They invite you to go outside. And we're trying to both teach ourselves and help you understand what we're seeing and in the woods, and what the history is. And also, what do we want with them today? They're here, we think they're cool. How do they belong to the future? So this mill site is in the very northern part of Leverett, on North Leverett Road, just below the Slaro Mill, as Susan had mentioned. There's a little red ball there. For those of you who don't live in Leverett, this is the intersection that it's on. Here's the Slaro Mill, which is known, the North Leverett Mill, known to many people. And just a little bit below that on North Leverett Road is a mill site. And there are other mills here. There's also a site here on Chestnut Hill Brook, which we went to see a couple of programs ago. If this site has one thing to characterize it, is that I would say that is what you see from the road is not what you get when you visit. This is a shot of the oldest part of this mill building, which you cannot really see from the road. And also of the bed frame that was pushed in, like you can see here, that was pushed in what is likely the outlet of the oldest mill and the inlet of the newer one. And I think that probably happened during some kind of flood because it's kind of stuck in there. In 1830, as Susan said, Daniel Graves came in the late 18th century to Leverett. And we don't have a map that shows anything about blacksmithing in this area before 1830. So the 1830 Darling map is the first map we find. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the site, explain the site a little bit, enough for you to get the video. And then we're going to delve into the history more. So I'm going to jump over a bunch of history that you might have questions about in order for us to really look at the site and then delve into the history. So you can see that in 1830, there is a side shop, she says side shop here. This is the bridge across the Sawmill River, which is now currently runs on this side. It was moved in the 1880s, but it used to run below, downstream from the Slaro, what is now the Slaro, what was then the Slaro Mill. And across the river, according to this map, there was a side shop, which, according to this little diagram, was actually water powered. We have never found any sign of it, but there you have it. It says so on the map, it must be there. Since the map does not mark any mill ponds, we cannot really conclude anything about the landscape in 1830 from this, other than that, you know, that there were still quite a few trees left in Leverett from this map. But in 1858, the situation in this area really starts to look like the industrial area that it became. And you can really start to see that the Graves family, of whom the progenitor was Daniel Graves, who died in 1836, have really moved into the area. As you can see, there are graves all over the map, which we'll explore a little bit later. And then you can also see that there's actually an impact on the landscape. It looks like there's a dam here. Again, this is the Slaro Mill is at this point here. This is the sawmill, just to ground you in where we are. It looks like there's a dam across with two buildings. And then a little bit down, there's a thing called the Graves Pill Shop, which is not directly in the way of the stream, but in fact, on a sort of on a side stream, which is how, you know, it looks like there are two dams or diversions, and the first one is a dam across, and the other one, the one downstream from that, at the Pill Shop, is sort of a, like I said, a diversion. And then this one is the SW Graves and Company side snave trimmings manufactory. By 1871, the landscape has changed and is more like it is now, although it isn't entirely like it is now, or like it now suggests it was, I should probably say. Again, you can see that there are two dams or diversions in this area. Again, here's a sawmill. This is still before the road got moved. And so now it looks like the first one is kind of a diversion, which creates a little stream. And the second one is a dam that runs, that is across the whole river. And as we will see, neither of those things are really true, quite true, but it looks more like it is today. It really, it starts to resemble the landscape. You can see that the Pail Shop, which used to belong to SW Graves, is now belongs to SS Graves, and so does the side snath trimmings manufactory. And there is also a G mill, and I'm not completely sure what G mill stands for. I will tell you later why. In case you're interested, this is Susan's house. This is the original Daniel Graves homestead, and his son Stephen Graves by 1871 is living in it, although he dies in 1873. So I'm trying to get us ready to understand the site that as we videoed it today. It's not really that easy of a site to see. So we're going to go look at the LiDAR. LiDAR is a kind of a ground radar taken from satellites, no, from airplanes. Eva, is it airplanes or satellites?
Sometimes one, sometimes another.
Okay, thank you. That's a really great answer. Both things are true. She's spoken like a true historian. This is the site that we're talking about. You can see here is the bridge, which is now, of course, now is above the sawmill. The sawmill is here. And then, you know, we will, so I will start to interpret this. What the LiDAR shows you is it shows you the scars in the ground that were left by history, which is, it also, of course, shows you a lot of other things. So it takes a little bit of interpreting. So I'm gonna start bringing in some interpretations. One of the great things about this site and about a lot of the sites in Leverett is that not a lot of construction has happened since then, so that we can still see the influence of the old. So what I'm going to do is bring in the water first. This is where the river runs currently. And the river is actually split below the site that we're talking about. And this is where the pail manufacturer used to be. It's a dam across, but it's only on part of the river. There is still that sort of diversion. This is probably a man-made split in the river. It certainly looks it. Usually when we look at a mill site, we go in from the bottom, and that's because we go in from downstream and we walk upstream. And the reason for that is that the key way in which you can identify a mill foundation is by looking at where the water comes out. And I actually really fooled myself on this site for a long time by letting go of that rule of thumb. But in any case, this site is a little bit, it's a little bit difficult to see from the bottom up. So we're going to go instead from the top down, and we're going to enter it up here above where there was any damming. And so the first thing that we're going to see when we move off the road is we see some stonework and levees, which are visible on the LiDAR. Here is another couple of levees and some stoneworks, piles of stones that seem to be they're not natural, but you need to do a bunch of interpreting to see what they are. And then there is what we think of as the tumbled foundations of the mill buildings. As you can see, this is where the green circle is. You see all these cool, it looks like somebody stapled it here or stitched it. And so between all of them, these levees, dam heads, and the site, they define the course of the water and the way we think that the mill pond ran. So you can see here, we think that there was a diversion above this levee, by this levee here. This would have been the dam on the other side, that there was a low dam there, enough, not a dam that goes across and stop like if you look at the old Slaro Dam, it really went across, it really made a pond, even though the water would still run over it. But this would have been a lower dam that just raised the water enough so that it could jump the bank and go into this area here, where it then would have run downstream and met another dam of which we only have one end, which would have stopped it and created a shallow but fairly large mill pond. And interestingly, if you look from the road, it's really hard to see that there was anything there because it just looks like a sort of a hilly landscape. It's only when you go to the other side, the river side of it, that you see anything. And we will see that on the video. So if I then show you in a diagram a little bit more, here's the Slaro Mill. We're going to, in the video, we're going to look down from the Slaro Mill downstream, and then we're going to go right to this area just above the dam. And this is a conservation committee. No, this land is now owned by the Friends of the North Leverett Sawmill. And we're going to sort of poke around and look at the dam, and then we're going to follow this levee on the riverside in the video. Like this, take a little look at where the pond was, and then continue down this levee, which becomes quite impressive. And then we're going to circle into the mill site, take a look around the mill site, and then we're going to come up. This is where the water rejoins the river. Actually here, I was pointing at the wrong spot, and it's a little bit off track here. And then we're going to come up into the mill site to have a look at it. Are there any questions at this time before we go into the video? Is anybody completely stumped? And I'm not hearing anything, so must be doing a good job explaining. Okay, so the video always takes a moment to load. So this is the first, I just wanted to show you before we get into the video that was the site, the way it looks from the road. And here we go from the Slaro Mill down the river. We were fortunate to have some nice water earlier this month so that we could actually see some flow. And here you can start to see that dam head of that old dam. That you see how low that is? That would have just raised the water about 5 feet. And if you look across the river from that, there is the rest of that dam. And here is the entry to that, to what is then became the mill. There's this sort of beachhead here that diverts the water. And so now we're looking on the water side, downriver. And now again, upriver. Here's that dam head. You can see here the Slaro Dam. And you can see all the stonework here. And that is what's going to become this big levee. And we're going to try your patience and walk down the levee, which is, it's a little bit of a distance, but it is really impressive because of that distance. There's a lot of work went into this, and they sort of used some features of natural geography, topography, I should say, and enhanced them. And you can sort of see the levee running here already. See? As Eva is walking down, and this then is what was the mill pond. This area here. There's some water sitting in it now. So you can see that this thing sort of starts to become more, it's still quite close to the river, you can hear it. It slowly angles away from the river and becomes, right, you see here, it's just sort of an enhancement of the natural, you know, a little bit of filling up. And now you can, from here, you can really see the whole extent of this pond would have been. So slowly the levee just becomes this bigger thing. About 1/4 mile, I would say, almost. Between 1/8 and 1/4 mile long. And one of the things you can really see when you walk here is how damaged this levee is already and how vulnerable it is to all these trees. Every time a tree falls, a piece of the levee comes down. You can see it here. See? But this tree, when it goes, is going to take another piece with it. And this here is the last part of the levee, that's the tallest part, which is still standing. But when these trees go, it's going to go. So there's yours truly, showing you how tall it is. And so now Eva is in the mill site, And she has this long pole to pull the camera on, and you're looking upstream to where the water came from. And this is the dam that created the mill pond up there. And here is the levee, which is quite the works at this end. This is the end of the levee. And here we now have the beginning of the foundation of the oldest mill. I'm going to stop it for a moment here. And you can see here, you see that this is hand stacked, beautifully stacked, really, stones. And there are these holes. And for a long time, we were puzzling over these holes. They seem really the wrong way to create an entrance for a mill. And I think that's because they're the exit of the old mill. This is where the water came out of the old mill. So the water was stopped by a dam and then ran through a flume to the old mill, which was on this foundation here. And later, a newer mill was built. And so you can really see, now you can really see that's the old mill. And here the water comes out. It would have, here you can see under here, a lot of space created. What you want in a mill is you want to have all that water concentrated onto your wheel, and then you want it to go away. You don't want it to pool up or anything because you want it to dissipate its power immediately once you've used it. So then you can see here with the old mill that they immediately widen the channel, right? It's like the water is done. There's a wheel in here somewhere. The water is done. It's done its thing. It needs to slow down and run, except that they built another mill right on the other side of it, probably in the 1850s. And these huge stones are all part of the newer mill. These are all dry stacked, like the wall. These are dry laid field stones. They were found that way. These guys are quarried. You can see you will see when we go on with the video, you can see the marks from the drills where they put the explosives. There's this thing that I call the sarcophagus. There are all these big stones that have metal pieces in them. I'm not totally sure what they're for. And then you can also see that the water then runs through here. And so wheels would have been in here, and they would have been wheels that sat with their bottom in the water that got turned by fast moving water. Big wheels so that you get a big turn, and then you can power something else by gearing it down. You get a faster turning thing. And then here you start to see the new foundation, which, as you will see, is both quarried and chinked, and in some places mortared. And here's the entry into the foundation. And again, you're standing with Eva, using her pull, you're standing where the mill floor would have been, right? Because this is the foundation, this is the basement. And so you can see here, this part of the site, it's still quite evident what the outline of the building is, right? You can see it's almost square. There are walls here. Somebody dumped a whole bunch of stuff here. Where it came from, I don't know. Who knows? Might have been road construction for all I know. But there's a whole pile of stuff in that one corner. But other than that, the outline is there. And then there's the older site here. And here are those immense stones, which is one of the things that makes this site so interesting. It's one site written on top of the other. And it's even possible that there's 3 generations. And if you look here, where the water runs away, you can see that this is again dry laid stone, field stone. So what that means, I think, is that the old mill, they created the site for the old mill, the levees, the whole thing That was probably done in the 1840s. They created the site. And then at some point when they needed more space or more, bigger and better somethings, they built, a newer mill to accommodate that. And then the water runs off, through this channel that is lined, as you can see here, by fieldstone. Now we're walking up the water out. You see the difference between these walls. You see here the quarry marks on these stones, and these walls, which are fieldstone, and they don't have incredibly square angles, and they don't have quarry marks, and they don't have chinking. And so you see the sarcophagus and the big pieces. There's a last little overview from the other side. That's not, I did that too fast. There you go, so slower. And so you see that there are these bays that I think would have been wheels in those bays in some way. Not totally sure exactly how, but that's what eventually I'm hoping that we'll figure out. Does anybody have any questions right now? Okay.
Actually, I do have a question.
All right, go ahead.
So I'm curious about this. It sounds like the natural flow of the river was diverted for this set of old and new mills.
Right.
What the river, was it split into two equal parts, or can you figure out like how much was diverted of the river?
I would say not the better part of it, but it probably depends on what the flow is at any given moment. Like in a summer season, it would have been a larger part of it. They would have had to, the dam would have had to hold back more water to make it over that threshold into that diversion.
Because it just seems to me like that's an awful lot of work to build those levees and to build that.
Yes.
Like why divert the
only
water?
Part of the river, right?
Yeah.
So they had a privilege to build a 5-foot dam, and that's one thing I'm still trying to figure out and trying to learn is why you get a privilege to build a 5-foot dam or a 15-foot dam. But one thing I would say is that one thing about a mill is that you don't want any more than you can use. You want as much as you can use, but water also threatens mills. Like mills were washed away all the time. If there was a freshet or something. So and I think what you'll see in a minute, when I have a couple of videos I'm going to just quickly play a few seconds of, and you'll see how little water is actually needed once they start really improving the gearing and all that.
Awesome, thank you.
So I made a diagram of the site. Here is a diverted river. And here is a dam of which, so it's coming down on the sort of roadside of the levee, but it needs to, of course, stop. You don't want the river to just run through your mill. You want to be able to control it. We looked for a long time. There's one place only where there could have been a dam, and interestingly, on the other side, there's nothing to be seen. So it completely washed away in some ways. But there's no other real explanation. And and then the water would have gone probably through some kind of wooden flume into this mill and then gone out this mill through these channels down here, where the bed frame is stuck. These are what's called undershot wheels, right? So the water is running and the wheel has its flaps into the running water. That's what's pushing it. It's not falling on top of the wheel. There's not a huge, what they're trying for here is fast moving water rather than a large head or a large amount of power coming out of that water. And then here, you can see that there's even more slabs that are just like these. I don't know what they're from. This is the end of the levee. There is some indication that this wall was longer and was washed away. And then there's the second mill, which is sort of very different in appearance, as you saw. And I actually think that it's possible that there's a second and then even a sort of improved second mill, because this part of it has quarried stones, but no mortar and very little chinking. And this part of it, you know, is much more recent, has all this quarried stone. It has these huge, these huge foundations, probably to hold trip hammers. And we'll find out about trip hammers in a second. And then there's all this stonework for the water on the way out. So you have to hold the water back here with a dam. And if that dam blows, your mill goes. So that's, you know, you really do want to have enough, but not too much. And I don't know how they really stopped it from being too much, but. So you can really tell that there's a couple of generations. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about blacksmithing and metalworking in the 18th and 19th centuries. In the 18th century, a blacksmith shop was kind of akin to a garage and a hardware store rolled into one. Shoeing horses, which is the thing we mostly know blacksmiths for today, was of course essential, but so was the manufacture and repair of parts for wagons, tools, and increasingly of parts for manufacturing enterprises. As industrialization moved along in the 19th century, so did the metalworking enterprise industrialize. And then the Pioneer Valley became a hotspot for the development of machine spots and machine shops and so forth. With Springfield and its gun makers at the southern end, and Greenfield's tap and die manufacturer, and lots of machine shops at the north. As a museum of our industrial heritage in Greenfield will tell you, factories and mills in Franklin County produced cutlery, hand tools, machine tools, measuring instruments, taps and dies. In addition to forming tools, bottoms for locomotives, etc. And water power was essential to all of them. And the Graves shop, and perhaps I should say shops, are part of this history, creating size and snaths, the handles, and the gadget that connects the one to the other was key to the agriculture that formed the better part of Leverett's economy in the first half of the 19th century. So it's not surprising that a blacksmith shop would specialize in making them. But there is a difference between a blacksmith shop, the way we imagine it in our heads, with a blacksmith in a leather apron banging at a horseshoe to make it fit, and the kind of manufacturing that could specialize in blades and small gadgets. And the difference between those two, between handwork and the industrial production, is a thing called a trip hammer. The leather apron still applies, but the wheeled hammer is replaced by a mechanical device driven by water power. These were not a new invention. They've been used for a couple of thousand years. They had them in ancient China. They had them in Rome. And so I have a picture here of a sort of early version. Oops, this happens every time. Sorry, I gotta try to go back again. It's always such a mystery to me why I can't make these YouTube things work. Sometimes I can make them work. Sometimes So here's a trick hammer. This is the blacksmith with the hot thing, hot metal. This guy opens the water to the wheel, and the wheel turns this thing that makes his hammer go up and down. And you see that this guy is turned out in 18th century or earlier. And that's because this is an 18th century or earlier type mill. This is more a forge. This is a thing, a mill that makes rather large things. And this is before all steel was cast iron. There was no rolled steel like we have now. That is an invention of the 19th century. And so all steel had to be flattened, like into the bands for wagon wheels, for instance. This method. Shut that guy up. He's pretty loud.
Pleun, just for you to know that when there's sound on the video, we can't hear you very well.
Oh, okay, I'll try to lower the sound on the video. Okay, so I was not able to find an 1840s or 1860s video of an 1840s or 1860s trip hammer, but I do have one that is right around the turn of the 19th century from Austria. I'm going to try to make this one go. We may have to get out of the video in order to do it. But I think what was new in the 19th century, in the very late 18th century and in the early 19th century, was the impetus to improve all tools and efficiency, including the efficiency of water wheels, as you can see with SS Graves's patent for this new and improved turbine wheel. The availability of abundant water in the small streams of New England's interior, the availability of wood and charcoal for the other half of what a smith needs with his heat, and an almost obsessive, I think, focus on the harnessing and directing of the water power. And so I just want to show you this trip hammer, which is going to take us out of the video. And I'm going to show us only a part. Can you hear me now? I'm going to show us only a part of this video, which is not great. But it has some essential features. So here you can see this water wheel, and you can see it's an undershot wheel. You see that? The water is going under here. It's hitting these blades as it goes down this little incline. And you see how it's a big wheel. And the video then follows the turning power as it is distributed throughout the mill. Through these, on all of these different, with all the leather straps and the pulleys. And it's distributed across the mill. Until here it starts to turn and drill, and it's too bad that this video is so bad. And here's the trip hammer. Probably more like the one that they had at our shop. And what I liked about this video is that it really shows how that trip hammer works. It shows you this thing to do. You can't stop it. It doesn't. You can't see anything. That's the needly do that really makes that hammer go up and down. It's like a wheel with pupeks that stick out that keep making it go up and down, which I think is really cool myself. But then I'm a geek. So let me get back to the slideshow. I could not get this YouTube video downloaded. And I think that's what the Graves family did together. and what culminated in a sizable industry at the ironworks site is they worked together to improve all that and to rebuild and create more capacity in order to really start producing. And so let me tell you a little bit, let me stop for a moment. Are there questions about that? Okay. So now let's go into the Graves family a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm coming in from the outside. So I'm reading as much as I can, but there is an end to what I can figure out. So if you look at and we have the beautiful Walling 1858 map of Franklin County, and it shows graves, of course, everywhere. And I have here a little list of the family members. Daniel Graves is the father. His sons are Stephen Graves and Daniel Jr. and Elijah. And Stephen has two sons, Samuel W. and Sanford Stephen Graves. And Daniel has one son, Cyrus M. Graves. Really, Cyrus, Sanford, and Samuel, interestingly, sometimes under the aegis of Stephen's name, are the ones, I think, who really developed this industry here. And you can see that there are graves every year in 1858. Here is Samuel W. Graves and Company, Size Snag Trimmings Manufactory. There's a Graves that lives here. I can't see that because I have things on my screen. Here is one of the houses. Here are some other houses. And what we're seeing here is that one waterworks building on another, and one generation building on the work of the previous. So Father Daniel is a blacksmith, and he teaches his sons, and particularly his grandsons, to be blacksmiths. And then they start harnessing their energy, both together and in competition with each other. So later taxes reveal that there were two blacksmith shops that are inactive that they kept carrying. And one of them, I think, was probably at least Daniel's original shop. And it may have been at the site that we've been studying, where he may have had a small trip hammer and he may not. I can't really tell whether that first mill might have been Daniel's mill. I don't have the records. It's likely that he served the surrounding farmers by making and repairing what they needed. It may have been the Scythe Shop marked at the corner of North Leverett Road in that early map. It would have paid a blacksmith to serve two roads. You have get more, just like a gas station wants to sit on a corner. But the fast improvement started after Daniel died in 1836. And all of these guys have multiple businesses, and it's pretty difficult to figure out which are separate buildings and which are partnerships in one business. Sometimes people had separate businesses and they would sort of timeshare. One guy would use the business on, I don't know what, Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and the other one the rest of the week. I don't know how they did it, but they did share it in one business. But they all lived, a lot of them lived here in what I would call, Blacksmith Row. Samuel Graves and his wife, Sarah Morse Graves, he's a blacksmith. Cyrus M. Graves, he's a blacksmith. Jane G. and his wife Jane, their children, and a guy named Alan S. Tilden, who I think, who was a blacksmith and who was their boarder, I think, or a family member. Maybe he was working in the works. Stephen Graves, who was actually a farmer, lived in the ancestral home, along with Pamela and their children. And they included his son, Sanford S., who in the 1850s are still living at home. But they all live in the neighborhood, and between them lives Emerson P. Littlejohn, who is also a blacksmith and who I believe was definitely one of the people who worked in their works. So they're all working on it, and you can see this is a list of some of the information that we have about them, and you can see that it started all in around 1844 when they start trading water privileges back and forth. And I must say that I haven't quite plumbed the depths of what that all means yet. But there's not huge sums of money involved at that time. But by 1850, you can tell from this non-population schedule that Cyrus Graves, who actually I think had a mill on Chestnut Hill Brook, had a shop on Chestnut Hill Brook with a second flume for that mill. He was making hose, 112 dozen hose, and 12,000. And here they come again, the side snath trimmings, which I will talk about in a minute. And together that's worth about $1,250. His cousin, Samuel W. Graves, also a blacksmith, who has 8 people working in his mill, produces 100,000 of the trimmings, 100,000 versus the 12,000. So he makes more than 10 times as many. He has 4 times as many people working. And this is all the result of the water power, more water power involved, a larger shop. And this is what's telling me that they built a larger shop, because you can't have 8 guys working in a tiny little mill. But Cyrus Cyrus is producing hose, which is a specialty work, and then also some of these trimmings. And he and William Hatch are showing their hose at the mechanics fair in Boston. So they're high quality blacksmiths, and they're really more into the, into the art, the artisanship, rather than the mass production. When we look a little bit later, and there's a lot that happens. Let me just see where I am. When you look a little bit later, Cyrus, by 1860, Cyrus has sold out and left for Ohio. He leaves right after his father dies. He sells his rights to Samuel W., who then proceeds to die himself. And his company, his business was called sometimes Samuel and Sons, no, S. Graves and Sons, but also very often Samuel and Company. But he dies in 1860, and I think the company was his brother Sanford. And I don't know why he was being anonymous. It seems odd. But if you look here, by 1860, Samuel is making now $8,000. So it's time and a half again what was being made earlier. Of course, he's using 25 tons of iron, and earlier he was also using 25 tons of iron. So he's not making really more. He's just, money has become worth less. And when you get to the 1860s, suddenly by 1870, S.S. Graves owns everything. And he starts really pushing everything together. They have a pail shop. They have what do you call that? A machine shop. And so after 1860 is when we have those tax records from what we can see. And Sanford S. Graves is invisible on the tax roll until he acquires his machinery in 1862. and my sense is that as soon as Stephen, his father, retires, he comes to the fore. All of a sudden he shows up, and all of a sudden it all belongs to him because Cyrus has left, Samuel has died, and he is everywhere after 1865, and he owns all the businesses. He's the last man standing. And so now the pail shop, which produces what, 27,000 pails, I think, a year, and the side snath trimmings manufacturer, along with the G mill, which I think is listed as a plaster mill in the taxes, and later probably becomes the machine shop, might have been a gypsum mill and instead of a grist mill. He gets quite dominant in the neighborhood. He owns every other house. His name is on everything. He has a big role. The map ascribes 3 houses and 3 businesses to him, and that is also what the tax records give him. Cyrus, who had left for Ohio, is back, has returned to Massachusetts, but is now in Northampton. And so I don't know what happened. Who knows? Maybe they had to fight. Maybe he just did not want to mass produce little gadgets. I don't know. One of the blacksmith shops that they had been carrying all this time is operated by an Elijah Graves, who I had mentioned earlier. But Eva and I talked about it a bunch, and it started right after Daniel's son Elijah died. So it would not have been him. He does not have a grandson Elijah. So we think it's an unrelated Elijah Graves. There's a lot of Graves in town. And so what are they making? What are side snath trimmings? So if you look here, I just wanted to show you some of these tax records. You can see here in 1850, it's Cyrus versus Samuel, and Cyrus is making his 112 dozen hoes and 12,000 side snath trimmings. He's the one who starts it, I think. And then Samuel is already making 100,000 of them, right? This is where his 8 hands, it took me a while to figure out that's an 8. And if you then look in 1870, it's S.S. Graves, who owns the pail shop, and he has two saws, 2 pail machines, and he makes 20,000 pails, and he makes 125,000 of what he now calls snath irons. So what are these things? So these are one of the things for which there are many patents in the US Patent Office. Silas Lamson in Shelburne Falls patented a method for manufacturing the curved handle of the American scythe. The European scythe, as you may or may not know, is straight. The American scythe has a curve to it. That curve can be made by finding exactly the right tree and then, by hand, making a handle. That's not what the handle of the scythe looks like that you have in your barn. It's made curved by steaming. So Lamson patented a system for steaming this curved handle. And then there was the Clapp family in Montague, right next door, patented the fasteners that fastened these handles to this. This is the scythe, and that's a snath, and this is an exam for us Dutch people to have to say all these words, scythe, snath, and this is the handle. And so Clapp patents a device for putting these handles on so they don't come off. The old 18th century and before scythes had been held to the snath, and the handles had been held to the snath by pushing pieces of hardwood in there so that they would be tight, and those things let go at the most inopportune moments. Scythes are really key to the food revolution that Americans created in the 19th century. They did not have mowing machines yet. They did not have, for a good part of the century, they did not have reaping machines, steam reapers. They had those eventually, but the scythes were really key to everything. And so here you can see this diddly-do. And interestingly, that the one that Clapp patents is just, to my mind, exactly the same as the one that Lamson has patented. And it's probably pretty similar to the one that our friends at the Graves Mill made. But there's also a piece of which I've not been able to find a drawing, a piece here that fastens the actual side to the snap. And I have a feeling that the specialty of the Graves, for which they did not file a patent, that they made was this thing. Because if you're making 125,000 of something, you're not making sides themselves. That, you know, that's a fairly specialized activity, making those. And there was actually a lawsuit over some of these guys. So the Leverett Historical Society actually has some of these sides in its collection, and these are, as you can see here, SS Graves, handy that he has those initials. These are this is an SS Graves side, and you can see here is that diddly-do that attaches the handle, and then there's a diddly-do here that attaches the side to the handle. I have seen no evidence that they made handles, but these are, I think, newer than the 1870s. And so my sense of it is that the pail shop got converted to making handles, because they did, after all, have a woodworking shop there. See, did have that. So my last slide is not of the works that we don't have a photograph of any of these works. We do have a photograph of the neighborhood in the 1880s. And, you know, look at all that mowing. I actually, you can tell that by the 1880s, they're not mowing by hand. You can tell that. I think it looks like it's mowed with a machine, a lot of it. But a lot of the mowing on the hills would have still been done by hand. That's it for my slideshow. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
My name is Seth Hemingway. I have a question, and that is about with all of the forests being cut in the 1700s, 1800s, and then all this work along the rivers. Are you seeing anything about increased erosion or more, more frequent flooding, or did you encounter anything that kind of gave indicators of whether that kind of change in the use of the landscape was impacting water flow?
I know it did. I didn't in this research, no, not particularly, but mills were washed out pretty frequently. The fact that that the hillsides were denuded made a lot of runoff happen. One way, if you ever have an area which seems like it has too much water in it, if you let the trees grow up, you got to get a lot less water in it because the trees are drinking up the water.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I can't say that I've encountered anything here, but I do know that that's the case, that you get increased runoffs. The rivers were not pretty at the time. They were running full of the shavings of the dyes that they used in the wool manufacture, of the stuff from the tannery shops. That stuff was all run into the river.
I was also thinking about the amount of noise if those trip hammers are running daily.
Actually, yeah, that's interesting. They're actually, yeah, you see those guys and you're thinking, well, those guys are going to be deaf, and they probably were. on the other hand, it makes a lot less noise than a machine-driven factory. The hammer makes noise, but the machinery doesn't, if that
Right.
makes any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question about, like, you appropriately called like the corner of North Leverett Road and Chestnut Hill sort of like blacksmith corner or something to that effect.
Right.
Was there anything special about the flow of the river, or like why did it become that just by merely these guys were gifted blacksmithing and they happened to live there, or was there something special about the flow of the river that made it very appropriate for developing a blacksmith shop?
If I had to guess, I would say that there are two things at play. One is that Daniel was a blacksmith, of course, and he taught his sons, one of whom was clearly more gifted at it than the other, one grandson. But what is available is both water and fuel, right? Because a blacksmith needs power and also needs heat. So the fuel, the charcoal at the time is also available. So for the blacksmith, so that is one thing that makes this area. But there's nothing about the river right there. If anything, the river is fairly quiet right there. There's not. If you traditionally think of a mill, you think of a cataract of some kind, right? A big elevation difference. And here, the elevation difference is achieved by a fairly long distance, so that the pond has some push on it.
Right.
Simply because it's a fairly long distance, and it holds back. It's a pretty shallow pond. But it holds back a bunch of water, and so you can get velocity on the water. But these, in the end, they're not needing to run the kind of machinery that needs an enormous amount of water power.
So is that the reason why they sort of developed that area right there and not upstream or downstream further, is because
they were
it's
all
a relatively flat area?
The whole river was full of mills.
But were they
Yeah.
different kinds of mills?
Yep. There were
And
blacks.
is one more suited for
Yeah. No, I don't
the
think
geography than others?
Yeah, it's possible that a sawmill would want to have a higher head. But I think one of the things is that the further you start going into the 19th century, sort of two opposing things start to happen. One is that they get outclassed by people with more power, that is, diesel starts to come in and people start to build mills on the big rivers, so that they can have a lot more power and they can produce on a much greater scale. You get Lowell, you get that scale starts to happen everywhere. And so the economies of scale class them out. And they're no longer able to both transport. The trees start to go away, but the trees start to become fewer. So their immediate fuel is not quite as available anymore. On the other hand, they keep increasing the efficiency of the wheel. So whereas in the 18th century, you might have needed a large piece of a lot of head with an overshot wheel, by the early 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, you're frequently talking about an undershot wheel. And then when you go into the turbine, that thing that they patented is a version of a turbine. It's not a metal turbine, but it's a wooden version of a turbine. And so you start to need a lot less volume of water. So, but the scale, I mean, they're not there now, right? The generator, the diesels, not the diesels, the steam engines, and the scale elsewhere really do them in eventually.
Thank you.
I had another question too, is whether the proximity to rail transport, whether it's bringing in iron or other materials and also selling some of their goods, do you see a timing like significant, I don't know when the rail lines were put through.
Well,
this
the real
area.
life, you can actually see between the two maps, not in the area that we have here, so I'm not going to put them back up. But the 1858 map does not have the railroad, and the 1871 map does. I think that's right. Isn't that right, Eva?
Yes.
Or, yeah. And so this is right when the manufacturing explosion happens in Leverett, and I'm sure it's no coincidence, the railroad really does help, of course, bringing, and in fact, there's one factory making railroad cars and one guy making wheels for them. So, so that all, that all helps, right?
And the railway is not very far further on toward Montague
Right.
from these mills.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, but you could also say that the railway, in part is attracted there too, but I don't know. It's sort of an everybody pushing it together kind of thing. I wanted to see if you were interested at all in talking about what I think about this site is that it is so rich. Like if you look at that sarcophagus, what I keep calling those big stones, and you compare them to the 18th century building, and it feels to me like if that site were cleaned up. The thing that I haven't even mentioned is that in the newer mill, there are two platforms for essentially for the forges / trip hammers, that big stones that clearly had some kind of fire happening on top of them, chimney type forge / forge foundations. And so it seems to me that there's a lot here. And with that levee, the levee works, it seems like a site that's really ripe for, I don't want to say excavating, but for clearing out some of the duff of 100 years and really having a look at it. But that all depends on whether we want to learn from them. Whether we want to, one of the things is that the sites are under, like the levee, they're under threat from the woods, right? The trees are growing in them. They're really taking down the 18th century walls. Those 19th century blocks are not really that much in danger of being pushed away by a tree. But those 18th century walls really are. And so I don't know if anybody's interested in talking about that.
I have a question about the indigenous population in the area. What can you tell us about them?
I would say Eva probably knows more about that. Do you, Eva? Or am I putting you on the spot?
Well, I think that's a whole different program.
Well, one thing we do know is that there was a fairly large indigenous population in the area.
And I think in terms of what might be right along this section of river, that's the kind of information that is held in confidence by the Mass Historic Commission, in large part because you don't want people to go in there and start digging and taking things out. And so specific information about specific sites is generally not publicized.
It's really interesting to me is that when it comes to both cellar holes and these industrial sites, they actually, and cemeteries, they end up getting protected if there's a sign. If it gets cleaned up and there's a sign that says, this is part of the such and such a site or overseen by the so-and-so committee, and that explains about it, there a lot less damage happens to them. People don't come as much with metal detectors, not as much happens, and of course there's the cleaning out of the trees. But when it comes to Native American sites, bounty hunting really can do a lot of damage. And these sites here are so visible that they're already being damaged by bounty hunting as far as they're going to be. There's always bobble hunters and people like that, and metal hunters. Although nobody's taken that bed out. I guess it's not interesting enough, huh?
Well, maybe our cleanup tomorrow will take the bed out. Probably not, but
I don't know how stuck it is. Have you tried to push
Yeah.
on it?
yes, I have.
Is it very stuck?
It's pretty stuck.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of.
It would be possible. But it would require probably a rope and a come along or something like that.
Rich says it's the stream bed. I think that's exactly right. It shows you, though, that there was a time when the river got high that it would have really washed stuff along, because that I can't see no other way than that thing would have gotten there that way. Other way that it would have really gotten stuck in there.
Yeah, we have video of our late 1990s 100-year flood, but I don't think we have any film of it down that far. We've got it at the Slero Mill and other places, but probably not.
Right. I'd be interested to see, because the fact that there is still that water sitting there suggests that water sometimes goes in there, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no real source of water. I don't think that there's really a spring. And
Yeah,
maybe there are a few springs. I don't know.
I don't think so. But
Yeah. Well, in my completely, one of the things that has happened is in Hawley, they created a historic site that had a whole bunch of different owners, and they didn't change any of that. People just agreed that they were going to make paths and they were going to make it accessible, and they applied for grants together and created a historic site of, in that case, of cellar holes. So I think one of the things that people don't like is the idea that a historic site might involve having to give up one's ownership, but I think it's the signage more than anything that really defines the fact that it's interpreted, defines a site. So, and the fact that it has been studied. And there's a wonderful place in, I think it's Ames Ironworks in southeastern Mass. It's an 18th century.
Water,
In Bridgewater?
West Bridgewater.
West Bridgewater, right. Have you been to it, Susan?
Yes, I did. I went to visit it because of this very reason.
Yeah,
Because they call it the War Memorial Park. So it has veterans celebrated because its history goes back through the Revolution or even earlier. And then
go ahead, more.
No, and then it was the Ames Shovel Factory, and they've turned it into a wonderful park in which a lot of different entities participate in keeping it up. The, Garden Club of West Bridgewater does all the plantings, and the veterans have picnics there, and I saw a wedding there when I was there. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, I would, for one, would love to see those trees gone that are threatening that levee. That would be really nice to take those out. Well, I want to thank you for being here. I don't want to go over my time too much.
and we want to thank you for all that you put into this and the wonderful presentation.